It was a grey, misty Wednesday morning in London, the kind where the cold air seeps through your coat, no matter how tightly you wrap it. Sophie Verstappen, 55 years old, had flown in from the Netherlands to visit Max during a short break between Formula One races. With a few hours to herself, she decided to take a quiet walk through the city, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck as she made her way toward Oxford Street. She had heard from fans and reporters about a new Red Bull retail store that had opened recently, featuring exclusive team gear, memorabilia, and even a section dedicated to Max's racing achievements. Curious and maybe a little proud, she thought it would be nice to step inside and see how her son's legacy was being shared with the world. When she arrived, the store stood out, sleek glass panels, vibrant Red Bull branding glowing above. The entrance and mannequins in racing suits posed dramatically in the front display. Sophie pushed open the heavy door, the chime alerting the staff inside to her presence. She walked in slowly, looking around with quiet admiration. Shelves were lined with Red Bull apparel, energy drinks, and miniature F1 car models. At the back, a wall of LED screens looped clips from Max's championship races, his victories, his podium finishes, his now iconic overtakes. She smiled gently, proud, thinking back to when Max was just a boy with a toy car in hand. But her peaceful moment didn't last. From behind the checkout counter, two employees exchanged glances. One leaned in and whispered something to the other. Sophie, unaware, wandered toward a shelf displaying Red Bull driver jackets. A young staff member approached, not with warmth, but with suspicion. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. Curtly, eyeing her worn handbag and simple outfit. "Oh no, thank you," Sophie replied with a kind smile, her Dutch accent light but clear. "I'm just looking. My son drives for Red Bull, so I wanted to see the store for myself." The employee raised an eyebrow. "Your son drives for Red Bull?" he repeated, nearly scoffing. "Yes," she said softly, now starting to feel uncomfortable. "Max Verstappen," the employee chuckled under his breath and turned to another staff member nearby. "She says her son is Max Verstappen," he said, loud enough for Sophie to hear. The second employee laughed. Within moments, a floor manager appeared. He didn't greet her or ask politely. He gestured stiffly. "Ma'am, unless you're here to purchase something, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Sophie blinked, confused. "Excuse me? I don't think this is the place for you," he said, his voice icy. "Please exit the store." Before she could say another word, two uniformed security guards approached. "Seriously?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not causing any trouble. I just—" "Ma'am," one of the guards interrupted. "We're asking you to step outside." Customers in the store turned to look. A few even pulled out their phones. Sophie's cheeks flushed red as the guards gently but firmly took her by the arms and led her toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear muffled laughter from the counter. One employee whispered, "What a joke," under his breath. The cold air hit her face as the glass doors closed behind her. She stood on the sidewalk, stunned. The city around her moved on. Buses passed, people bustled, and no one seemed to notice what had just happened. She stared down at her hands, which trembled slightly before taking a slow breath to steady herself. She wanted to cry, not from anger, but from the deep humiliation of being treated like she didn't belong in a place her son had helped build. Someone who had filmed the moment walked past and gave her a sympathetic glance. She thought of calling Max, but she didn't want to burden him. Not yet. Instead, she turned and walked away, the sound of traffic masking the silent ache in her chest. That evening, the sky over London was painted in fading tones of steel grey as city lights flickered. Max Verstappen had just wrapped up a long day of simulator training and sponsor meetings. Back in his flat, overlooking the River Thames, he poured himself a glass of water, kicked off his shoes, and glanced at his phone. A message from his mother. "Dinner still at 7?" He smiled and replied, "Of course, can't wait." At exactly 7:02 p.m., the elevator chimed, and Sophie stepped inside Max's apartment, wearing the same modest clothes from earlier. A wool coat buttoned to the top, and her simple black handbag clutched tightly in her hand. Max greeted her with a warm hug, then pulled out a chair at the dining table, where he had ordered Thai food, her favorite. They talked about small things at first. She asked about his next race in Monaco. He joked about how bad his parking still was. But something about her face, the quietness in her eyes, the way she stirred her tea without drinking it, made. Max paused. He set down his chopsticks. "Mom," he said gently, "what happened today?" Sophie looked up, startled. "What do you mean? You're quiet. You're always happy when you visit. You weren't like this yesterday." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I went to the Red Bull store today, the one near Oxford Street." Max nodded, expecting a good story. "I thought it would be nice to see it, to look at the merchandise, see how people celebrate your career. But, it wasn't what I expected." Her voice cracked slightly on that last word. Max leaned in, concern on his face. "What happened?" She tried to brush it off. "It's not important. I don't want to make a big deal of it." "Mum," Max said firmly but calmly, "tell me." So she did. Everything. The glances, the laughter, the coldness, the moment she mentioned his name and the smirk that followed. How 2 guards walked her out, how employees laughed behind the counter, as if she were some crazy old woman pretending to be someone's mother. She didn't cry, but as she spoke, her voice trembled, and Max noticed her hands fidgeting in her lap. When she finished, there was a long silence. Max stared at the floor for a few seconds. Then, slowly, he looked up. His jaw clenched. "Did anyone hurt you?" he asked quietly. "No, Max, they didn't touch me, just pushed me out like I didn't matter." He stood up from the table and paced once across the room. "You've done everything for me. Since I was a kid, you drove me to every kart race. You ate meals alone in cheap hotels while I trained. You gave up everything so I could chase this life. And this is how they treat you?" "Max," she began. "No. This isn't about me being angry," he said. "This is about respect. They humiliated you for not wearing expensive clothes, for walking in alone. They didn't care who you were, and that's the problem. They think someone who looks ordinary doesn't deserve kindness. That's not the Red Bull I race for. That's not the team I believe in." Sophie reached for his hand. "Please, don't make a scene. I didn't tell you to start a war." "I'm not starting a war," Max said, squeezing her hand. "I'm starting a conversation." He walked into his room, pulled out his phone, and sat at his desk. "I have a voice, Mom. I have millions of people watching. It's time I use it for something more than lap times." She didn't stop him. She didn't have to. For the first time that day, she felt safe. The next morning, Max Verstappen sat at his desk before the sun had fully risen over the London skyline. Outside, the city buzzed to life, but inside his apartment it was quiet, focused. He opened his phone, hit record, and spoke directly to the camera. His voice was calm but firm, honest. "Yesterday, something happened that I can't stay silent about. My mother, the person who supported me since day one, walked into a Red Bull retail store in London. She was judged for how she looked, treated with suspicion, laughed at, and escorted out by security. She didn't go in shouting who she was. She didn't demand special treatment. She walked in like any normal person, and that's the point. You shouldn't have to be famous and/or rich to be treated with basic human decency. Red Bull has been my team, my family. But this was wrong." He paused, eyes steady. "I've spoken to Red Bull management. I'm not asking for heads to roll. I'm asking for reflection, for change, because if this can happen to my mom, it can happen to yours too." He posted the video on Instagram and Twitter with the caption, "No one should be treated like this, not ever." By 10 a.m., the post had gone viral. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Respect starts here. Justice for Sophie. Red Bull Responsibility top drivers retweeted it. News anchors replayed the video on morning television. Thousands of fans flooded the comment sections with outrage and support. "She's Max's mom. This is unbelievable. If they can do this to her, imagine how they treat people who can't fight back." Huge respect to Max for standing up for what's right. Some even uploaded side-by-side comparisons of Sophie with old photos of her at karting tracks, cheering Max on in the rain. Others stitched together TikToks showing moments where Max had spoken about his mother's sacrifices over the years. The emotional weight of it hit people hard, but the response wasn't just emotional, it was corporate. By midday, Red Bull Racing issued a public apology. "We are deeply sorry for the treatment Sophie Verstappen experienced at one of our London retail locations. We are investigating the incident internally and will take corrective action immediately. Our stores are meant to welcome fans from all walks of life. What happened was unacceptable and not in line with Red Bull values." But it didn't stop there. Later that week, Sophie received a personal call from Red Bull's global CEO, not a PR rep, the top executive. He listened to her, apologized directly, then told her something that left her speechless. "We'd like to name a new fan hospitality program after you, one focused on dignity, inclusivity, and human respect. Every Red Bull location will include mandatory training for staff. And we want you to be the guest of honor at the next Grand Prix weekend. Not because you're Max's mum, but because you reminded us what truly matters." Sophie didn't expect the world to change, but in that moment it did, just a little. And as she stood beside Max on the grid 2 weeks later, watching fans hold up signs reading, "We stand with Sophie," she felt something powerful swell in her chest. Not fame, not pride, but the feeling that her quiet voice had echoed louder than she ever imagined. That night felt different from all the others. Sarah couldn't understand how everything had happened so fast. She still remembered the tears that had streamed down her face when she saw the bill. Not just the tears, but the impact of Max's generosity still shook her deeply. She couldn't believe that man, one of the world's most famous race car drivers, had actually helped her in the way he did. After that experience, she had trouble sleeping. Her mind was full of questions. Why did he do this? What was the reason behind such a huge gesture? But at the same time, she couldn't stop thinking about how something as simple as a restaurant bill had changed her life. The next day, Sarah went back to work, but the atmosphere felt different. When she walked into the restaurant's kitchen, her co-workers were buzzing, talking about Max Verstappen's visit. The waiter who had served Max's table was bragging, saying the driver was a really nice guy, but nothing hinted at what had actually happened. As Sarah served the tables, her thoughts were consumed by the previous night. Max's gift was still with her. He had given her so much more than money. He had shown her that there was still kindness in the world. But what would she do with all of it? She knew her life needed to change. Hours later, at the end of her shift, the manager called her over for a chat. She walked up with some hesitation, wondering if something was wrong. But what he had for her was completely unexpected. He handed her an envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten note. "Sarah, I saw what happened yesterday, and I can't help but be impressed by your honesty and hard work. This is a small gesture of thanks for the incredible person you are. I hope this helps. You, Max Verstappen." Inside the envelope was a check, not just to cover the bill, but to help her start a new chapter in her life. Sarah stared at the check, her heart racing. She couldn't believe it. "Is this real?" she whispered to herself. It was an amount she never imagined seeing in her life. She looked at the manager, who just smiled. "Max said you deserve it. He nodded. It was more than she could have dreamed. Sarah's life would never be the same. Max's generosity had given her more than she could have imagined, and she knew she was ready for change. She finally felt like she had a chance to take care of herself and maybe even help her family. But the story didn't end there. With the money and Max's words etched in her mind, Sarah knew the impact of his gesture was just beginning. It wasn't just about the check. It was the life lesson she had learned. Never underestimate the power of a kind act, and, most importantly, never stop dreaming, even when everything seems hard.